The elevator doors opened, and I stood there holding a bouquet of red roses and 2 tickets to Paris, watching my husband go down on one knee in front of another woman. The whole office was already on its feet. Balloons drifted against the glass. Someone popped a bottle, and a banner over the reception desk read, "Congratulations." I had come to surprise Jake for Valentine's Day. It turned out everyone else had gotten the surprise first. He slid a diamond onto Sloane Merrick's finger, and the room erupted. Nobody noticed the wife in the doorway with the flowers. 30 minutes later, my phone showed 152 missed calls. But that is not the part that ended him, because not one person cheering in that room knew the truth. My name was on 83% of that company. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where the quiet ones turn out to be holding every card, and the people who counted them out finally learn what that costs. If a calm woman with the receipts is your kind of story, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Stay with me, because what I did next did not need a single raised voice. Rewind 6 hours. My name is Tina Sullivan. I am 34 years old, and that morning I was standing at my kitchen island, wrapping 2 plane tickets in tissue paper like they were something breakable. I am a CPA. For most of my adult life, I have managed the Sullivan family holdings. Quiet money, farm money, 3 generations of it turned into something that lived in spreadsheets instead of soil. I am good at it. I am good at being the person who makes sure everything balances while somebody else stands at the front of the room. That is a skill nobody claps for. I had booked a full week in Paris February 14th through the 21st because I wanted 1 week where Jake could not check his phone and I could pretend we were still the 2 people who got married on a courthouse lunch break. I taped the tissue paper closed and practiced saying it out loud. Happy Valentine's Day. Pack a bag. The company can breathe without you for 7 days. I remember thinking that last part and almost laughing, because the company could breathe without him a lot more easily than anyone there understood. It was, after all, mostly mine. I did not say that to people. I never had. I set the tickets next to the roses I had picked up at the market, and I checked my reflection in the dark window over the sink. I looked hopeful. I looked like a woman driving toward good news. I had no idea I was about to walk straight into the worst 30 seconds of my marriage and the best decision of my life. To explain the flowers, I have to explain the folder in my safe, and to explain the folder, I have to go back 6 years. When my father died, he left me the pen. That is how he described the family's holdings once, near the end. Not the land, not the accounts, the pen, the thing you sign with, the choice. I was 27 and terrified and holding a name that meant something in 3 counties. Jake was the charming one. Jake could walk into a bank and make the loan officer feel lucky. So when we started Meridian Agrisystems, I did the natural thing, the thing I am still untangling in my head. I put up the money, I built the structure, and I put Jake out front. Founder and chairman, the card said. It was my capital that seeded it, my family trust that held the controlling stake, my nights that balanced the early books. But it was his face on the website, his voice in the pitch meetings, his handshake in the photos. I told myself I preferred it that way. I told myself I was the roots, and he was the harvest, and roots do not need to be seen. 6 years later, Meridian was worth around $670 million, and my trust held 83% of it, $558 million on paper, in my name. And every day I walked into that building, people called me Jake's wife and asked if I wanted a bottle of water. I let them. I thought I was being humble. I was being erased, and I was the one holding the eraser. I want you to see the Meridian office the way I saw it, because it matters later. Glass everywhere. Open floor. A wall of framed press about the visionary founder who had built an empire out of nothing. Nothing, meaning me. I would come by maybe twice a month to review numbers. Grant, our CFO, would rather I did not review. The receptionist knew my face, but not my role. Once she asked me to sign the visitor log. I signed it. That was the year the framed articles started calling Jake self-made. Sloane Merrick arrived 8 months before that Valentine's Day. Jake had championed her hard for the CEO seat, and she took to it like she had been born in that chair. She was sharp, tailored, quick to smile at investors, and quicker to look through me. The first time we met, Jake introduced me as Tina, and Sloane said, "Oh, the one who does the books," and turned back to her conversation. I remember standing there with my hand still half raised. I did not correct her. Correcting her would have meant explaining, and explaining would have meant admitting how strange our whole arrangement was. So I let her think I counted receipts for a living. In a manner of speaking, I did. What I did not know that day, watching Sloane laugh at something Jake said with her hand on his forearm, was that I was looking at my husband's future fiancé. What she did not know was that she was looking at the woman who owned the floor under her heels. Both of us were wrong about who the other one was. Only one of us was going to find out in time. There had been a warning. There is always a warning, if you are the kind of person who reads the fine print, and reading fine print is the one thing I have never been able to stop doing. 2 weeks before Valentine's Day, I was going through the year-end consents, the routine board paperwork that keeps a company legal. And I found 3 of them I did not remember. Written consents, equity adjustments, my signature at the bottom of each one. I brought it up over dinner, carefully, the way you touch a bruise to see how deep it goes. I said, "Jake, did I sign the December consents? I don't remember these." He did not even look up from his plate. He said the lawyers handled it, the way you would tell a child the grown-ups took care of it. I said the signatures looked a little off. He set down his fork then, and he smiled the smile I used to think was confidence, and later understood was contempt. He said, "Tina, you don't need to worry about the corporate side." And then he said, the thing I would carry around for the next 2 weeks like a stone in my shoe. "You count the beans. I'll build the empire." I laughed, because that is what you do when someone you love says something that small. But I did not forget it. I went upstairs and I pulled my own copy of the shareholder agreement, and I read it twice. Everything was still mine. I told myself the consents were probably fine, that Jake was careless, not dishonest. I wanted so badly for careless to be the answer. It was not the answer. Jake's mother came for dinner that same week, and Carol Renner has a gift for finding the softest place in a person and pressing. She is 63, sharp-tongued, and she raised Jake alone on very little, which she mentions the way other women mention the weather. She sat at my table, ate the roast I made, and asked when I was going to give her son a child. Not if. When. I told her, evenly, that Jake and I had been trying for a while and it had not happened. She dabbed her mouth and said that a man like Jake needed a family, needed a legacy, and that some women just were not built for it. Then she said Sloane looked like she came from good strong stock. She said it the way you drop a coin down a well, just to hear how far it falls. I passed her the potatoes. What I felt was not new. I had felt it at every holiday for 6 years, this quiet campaign to make me the placeholder in my own marriage. But something had shifted in me since the consents. I looked at Carol working so hard to shrink me at my own table, and for the first time I felt almost sorry for her, because she was terrified. Terrified of ending up alone, of a son who might forget her, of a future she could not control. It did not make her kind. It just made her human, and human is not the same as forgiven. I cleared the plates. I did not argue. I had learned a long time ago that you do not win by getting loud at the table. You win by owning the table. The morning after that dinner, I called Dana Whitlock. Dana has been the family's attorney and trustee for 11 years, and she is the only person outside a courthouse who knows exactly what I hold. I told her about the consents, the 3 I did not remember signing, the signatures that leaned the wrong way. She got very quiet, which is how Dana gets loud. She asked me to scan them and send them over. Then she asked the question that mattered. "Tina, do you want me to open a forensic audit?" I wanted to say yes right there. But I knew how it worked, and so does she. A full audit needs a board resolution, and getting a resolution meant tipping my hand to a board Jake had spent 6 years stacking with his allies. Jake had already tabled the last 2 audit requests, buried them under quarterly noise. If I pushed too early, he would see me coming and clean the trail. So I did the disciplined thing, the thing that felt like nothing and was actually everything. I told Dana to quietly confirm the trust's controlling position was airtight, to pull the original founding documents, and to be ready to move the moment I said go. She confirmed it that afternoon. 83%. Ironclad. Control provisions. Right of first refusal. The works. I hung up and sat in my car in the office parking garage, looking up at the glass tower with my husband's name inside it, and I felt the ground steady under me for the first time in weeks. I did not know yet what Jake was hiding, but I knew where every exit was. And I knew that whatever came, I would not be the one left standing in the cold. So that brings us back to Valentine's Day. I had decided, against every cautious bone in my body, to be spontaneous for once. No agenda, no spreadsheet, just a wife who missed her husband, driving 25 minutes downtown with roses on the passenger seat and 2 tickets to Paris in her coat pocket. I practiced my face at every red light. I wanted to walk in, hand him the flowers, watch his eyes go soft the way they used to, and say, "Let's leave the Empire alone for 1 week." I even let myself imagine Sloane seeing it, seeing that the quiet wife could be romantic too, and feeling a little foolish for looking through me all those months. I parked in the garage where I had sat 2 weeks before, feeling the ground steady. I took the elevator up. I could hear music before the doors opened, and voices, and laughter. And I thought, oh, they must have closed a deal. How nice. I picked a good day. I fixed the ribbon on the bouquet. I checked my lipstick in the brushed steel of the elevator wall. The car chimed at the top floor. The doors slid open on the sound of my whole life applauding for something I had not been invited to. If you have ever driven somewhere with your entire heart open, only to walk straight into a room that had already moved on without you, then you know what the next few seconds felt like. Stay with me. This is where the woman with the flowers stopped being invisible. Comment below where you are watching from, and subscribe, because you are going to want to be here for what she did when the cheering stopped. The doors opened and the noise hit me like warm water. The whole floor was packed. Someone had strung fairy lights along the glass, and there were those foil balloons catching the afternoon sun, and a folding table dressed in white with champagne flutes in neat rows. My first thought, honest to God, was that it was for me. That Jake had somehow found out about Paris and turned it into a party. That is how much I still wanted to believe in him. I stepped out with the roses against my chest, and I actually started to smile. Then I read the banner. Congratulations. And underneath it, smaller, on a printed sign propped against a vase, 2 names inside a heart. Jake and Sloane. I remember my smile just staying there on my face, frozen, because my body had not caught up with my eyes yet. People were turned away from me, toward the center of the room, where a little clearing had opened in the crowd. I could not see what they were looking at. I moved sideways, on instinct, the way you move to get a better view of an accident. And the crowd shifted, and there he was, my husband, down on one knee on the carpet of the company I paid for, looking up at the CEO I did not hire but somehow employed, holding a small velvet box open between them. Sloane had both hands pressed to her mouth. Her eyes were shining. Everyone was holding their phones up. And I stood there at the edge of it, a wife nobody had thought to warn, holding flowers for a man who was proposing to somebody else. The roses suddenly weighed 100 pounds. I did not make a sound. Later people would say they never even saw me come in. That part at least was true. I had spent 6 years making sure of it. He said something I could not hear over the blood in my ears, and Sloane nodded, fast, laughing and crying at once, and he stood and slid the ring onto her finger. It was a big stone. I knew, without wanting to, roughly what it cost, because I know what comes in and out of our accounts, and I had watched a number leave 3 weeks earlier that I had assumed was a bonus pool. It was not a bonus pool. It was on her hand now, catching the light, while the room roared. Jake kissed her. Not a polite kiss. A kiss for an audience. One hand in her hair, dipping her back while people whooped. Champagne corks. Someone chanting his name. My husband, being adored, in a building that belonged to me, for getting engaged to a woman who was not his wife. And that was when Sloane opened her eyes mid-kiss and saw me. She did not startle. That is the part I keep coming back to. She saw the wife standing there with the bouquet, and she was not afraid, and she was not ashamed. She straightened up, still holding Jake's arm, and she smiled at me across all those cheering people. Then she said it, just loud enough to carry, just for me. Behind every founder is a woman who finally got out of his way. Jake had not seen me yet. He was still soaking in the applause, but Sloane held my eyes while she said it, and she let it land. And then she turned back to her crowd and lifted her new ring so it caught the light again. I understood then that this was not an accident. This was a coronation, and I had been invited only in the sense that a queen invites the person she is replacing. I felt something in me go very, very still. Here is where I think I surprised myself. Every version of me I had ever met would have done something in that moment. The younger me would have cried. The angry me, the one I kept locked away, would have crossed the room and thrown the roses in his face and told 200 people exactly whose money they were drinking. And the truth is, I could have. I had the standing to burn that whole party to the ground with 4 sentences. But I looked at Jake laughing, and Sloane shining, and all those raised phones ready to make me the story, the wife who lost it at the engagement party, and I thought, no, you do not get that version of me. You do not get to be the man whose crazy first wife made a scene. I set the bouquet down on the reception desk, right next to the visitor log I had once signed like a guest in my own kingdom. I laid it down gently, like I was putting something to rest. I turned around. I walked back to the elevator on legs I could not feel. My hand found the 2 Paris tickets in my coat pocket and closed around them so hard the edges bit my palm. The doors opened. I stepped in. And just before they closed, I looked back at the room one time, and not one person was looking at me. Perfect. The doors sealed, and the noise cut off, and it was just me and my reflection in the steel and the sound of my own breathing. I did not fall apart. I did the opposite. Somewhere between the top floor and the garage, the wife who had spent 6 years disappearing decided to reappear, and I already knew exactly where to start. I did not cry in the car. I know people expect that part. I sat in the driver's seat in the cold garage and I did not turn the key for a long time, and instead of falling apart, I did the thing my father taught me to do when the numbers stopped making sense. I made a list. Not on paper. In my head, the way I balance anything, line by line, the joint checking, the joint savings, the credit cards with his name and mine, the house, which people assumed was ours and which was actually held by the trust, the tickets in my pocket, the consents I had not signed, the audit Dana was ready to open, and under all of it, the one line that changed everything, the line I had spent 6 years pretending was not the most important line on the page. 83%. I let myself really look at it now, the way I had not let myself look before. Jake had not just cheated on me, that would have been almost simple. Jake had stood in a building I built and let a room full of people crown him king of a kingdom he did not own, and he had signed my name to paper to make it more his. He had looked me in the eye over pot roast and called it my job to count the beans. And the thing about counting, the thing he never understood, is that when you count everything, eventually every number leads somewhere. I put the key in the ignition. My hands were steady now, steadier than they had been in years. I was not going home to grieve. I was going home to open a safe. The grieving could wait. The math could not. The house was dark when I got home, and quiet in the particular way a house is quiet when you finally understand it is yours. I did not turn on all the lights. I hung my coat, and I took the 2 tickets out of the pocket, and I set them on the kitchen island where the tissue paper still sat from that morning. 6 hours. That was all it had been. 6 hours between wrapping a gift and canceling it. I opened my laptop right there, standing up, still in my shoes, and I pulled up the airline. I found the reservation. February 14th to the 21st, 2 passengers, Renner and Sullivan. I hovered over the cancel button for exactly one breath, and then I clicked it, and I watched Paris disappear from my life without so much as a confirmation email pop. It was the smallest thing, a refund request, but it felt like pulling a splinter I had been walking on for 6 years. There would be no week of pretending. There would be no version of us that got saved by the Eiffel Tower. I closed the laptop. Then I walked down the hall to the study, to the safe behind the false panel that Jake had never once cared to ask about, and I knelt down in front of it in the dark. I knew the combination by heart. My father's birthday. I turned the dial and the little door swung open, and inside, on top of the passports and the deeds and the things that outlast a marriage, sat a brown leather folder I had not opened in years. I lifted it out with both hands. It was heavier than I remembered. Everything they were celebrating downtown I was about to hold in my lap. I sat down on the study floor with my back against the desk and I opened the brown folder, and the first thing on top was the founding shareholder agreement of Meridian Agrisystems, the original. Not a scan, not a copy in some server Jake could reach. Paper. Signed. I ran my finger down the pages the way you run your hand over a fence you built yourself, checking that every post still holds. Section by section, it was all there, exactly as Dana and I had drafted it 6 years ago when I was young and grieving and smart enough, at least, to protect one thing. The Sullivan Family Trust, 83%. Voting control. Right of first refusal on every share. The power to call a shareholder meeting. The power to seat and unseat the board. The power, in plain language buried in legal language, to end anything that needed ending. Jake was founder and chairman in the way a hood ornament is the front of a car. He looked like the thing driving it. He was decoration bolted to the top of a machine that answered, in the end, to me. I had spent 6 years so busy being humble that I had let myself forget the shape of what I held. Downtown, right now, they were pouring champagne over a man's borrowed crown, and here I was, on the floor of a dark house, holding the actual thing, not a symbol of it. The thing itself. I felt something come back into my chest that I had not felt since my father was alive. Not anger. Anger is loud and it burns out. This was quieter and it did not burn out. It was authority. I had given mine away on purpose, one polite silence at a time. I was about to take all of it back. And then a piece of paper slipped out of the folder onto the floor. It was a single sheet, folded in thirds, gone soft at the creases from being folded a long time ago and never opened again. I knew the handwriting before I unfolded it. My father wrote the way he talked, in short, flat sentences that meant more than they said. He must have tucked it into the folder before he died, knowing I would only find it when I finally opened the thing all the way. There was a single line on it, in blue ink, pressed hard enough to feel from the back. Keep the pen in your own hand, Tina. I sat with that for a long time, because he had known. Not the specifics. Not Jake. Not Sloane. Not a party with fairy lights and my name forged on a consent. But he had known me. He had known that his careful daughter, the one who balanced everything, would find some tall, confident person to hand the pen to, and would call it love, and would call it humility, and would slowly sign herself out of her own life while smiling and passing the potatoes. He had watched me do smaller versions of it my whole childhood, and so he left me one short line to find on exactly this kind of night. I heard Jake's voice in my head, from over the pot roast, so pleased with himself. You count the beans, Tina. I'll build the empire. 2 weeks ago, it had put a stone in my shoe. Now, sitting on the floor with my father's ink under my thumb, it just sounded like a small man describing a job he did not understand. Counting the beans is how you find out someone has been stealing them. I folded the note back up, I put it in my breast pocket, over my heart, where it stayed for everything that came next. Then I reached for my phone and I called Dana. Dana picked up on the second ring even though it was nearly 10 at night, because Dana knew that if I was calling at that hour, something had finally broken loose. I did not soften it. I told her about the party, the knee, the ring bought with what I had assumed was a bonus pool, the banner with my husband's name in a heart next to another woman's. She was silent, and then she said, in her flat courtroom voice, "I am so sorry, Tina." And then, half a second later, "Because Dana is who she is," she said, "and what would you like to do about it?" That is the sentence I had been waiting 6 years to answer. I told her to go. All of it. Open the forensic audit under my authority as controlling shareholder, effective immediately, no board resolution required, because control gives me the standing to order it directly. Pull the bridge financing, the next round of growth capital that I had personally guaranteed, the money Jake and Sloan were counting on to close their expansion and hold up their valuation. Freeze the trust's exposure. Prepare a notice to call an emergency shareholder meeting. And quietly, carefully, pull the December consents I had flagged and put a forensic examiner on the signatures. Dana wrote it all down. I could hear her pen. When I finished, she said, "Tina, once the audit starts, we cannot unring this bell." "I know," I said. I was tired of unringing bells. I had spent my whole marriage unringing them, apologizing for noises I had not made. I told her to start first thing in the morning. Then I hung up, and I sat in my dark house, and for the first time in a very long time I did not feel like a wife. I felt like an owner. That night I did the part that people always ask about, and it is less dramatic than you would think, and more permanent. I opened my banking apps one by one. The trust accounts I locked down completely with a few taps, revoking a general power of attorney Jake had never earned, and I had foolishly granted him early on. His authority over anything with the Sullivan name on it evaporated at 10:40 that night. The company accounts he could not touch anyway once the audit flag went live. The bank would ice anything questionable the moment Dana's notice hit in the morning. But the joint accounts, the ones with both our names, the everyday checking and the savings, those I could not simply seize. That is not how it works. A true joint account with rights of survivorship takes both signatures to close, and I was not about to forge his the way he had forged mine. So I did what the law actually lets a person do. I moved my own contributions out, canceled the supplementary cards issued in his name off my credit line, and filed a formal request with the bank to freeze the joint accounts pending a marital financial dispute, which their fraud department was very willing to honor once I mentioned the word forgery. It was not the clean guillotine people imagine. It was a series of careful, boring legal moves, each one closing a door he thought would always be open. By midnight, Jake Renner had woken up rich and powerful and gone to sleep, without knowing it yet, as a man whose wife had just quietly walked through his whole life turning off the lights. He was still at his party. He had no idea. He would find out the way everyone finds out these things now. His card would get declined. People think revenge is loud. Mine was a phone call to my lawyer and a folder from a safe. If you have ever been underestimated by someone who signed your name without asking, you are going to want to see what the audit found. Hit subscribe so the ending finds you. The next morning at 9 sharp, a forensic auditor named Priya Anand walked into the Meridian lobby with 2 associates and a letter of engagement bearing my signature, my real one, and my title spelled out in full for the first time in that building's history. Controlling shareholder, Sullivan Family Trust. The receptionist who used to hand me water bottles read the letter twice and went pale. Within the hour, Priya's team had a conference room and access to the financial records, and Grant Whitfield, our CFO, was standing in the doorway of that conference room, looking like a man watching the tide come in over his shoes. I was not there. I did it on purpose. I did not need to watch. I had learned, finally, that presence is not the same as power, and that the person who owns the building does not have to stand in the lobby to be felt. Dana called me at 9:52 to say the audit was live and the bridge financing had been formally withdrawn, which meant that somewhere downtown a very expensive expansion had just lost the ground under it. And Grant, she said, Grant asked to speak with counsel. On day one, before anyone had even asked him a single question. I thanked her and hung up, and stood at my own kitchen window with a cup of coffee, and I thought about how the guilty never wait to be accused. They start apologizing before the knock. Grant had heard the knock. It was going to get so much louder. Priya called me herself on the third day, and forensic accountants do not use dramatic words, which is exactly why what she said landed so hard. She said, "Ms. Sullivan, we have a signature problem." Over the past 3 years, she explained, there was a pattern of written board consents authorizing equity adjustments and capital movements, and each one carried my signature at the bottom. 11 of them. I had signed none. I want to be clear about what that meant, because it took even me a moment to feel the full weight of it. My husband had not just told a lie about who founded the company. He had, over 3 years, forged my name onto legal documents in order to shift equity toward himself and move money through channels he controlled. Priya's examiner had already flagged the pen pressure, the letter formation, the little tells that a forged signature carries like a limp. She was 90% certain, pending final analysis, that the signatures were not mine, and 100% certain that the movements they authorized had benefited Jake personally. Some of the money had a familiar shape, a very expensive stone-shaped shape. I sat down when she told me that part. Not because I was surprised, because the last thread of the story I used to tell myself finally snapped. He is careless, not dishonest. I had said that to my own reflection 2 weeks before. Careless men lose receipts. They do not forge their wife's name 11 times across 3 years with the steady hand of a man who has done it before and expects to keep doing it. This was not a mistake. This was a habit. And habits, unlike mistakes, are things a prosecutor can hold in 2 hands and show to a jury. Once I started pulling the thread, the whole sweater came apart. I spent that weekend at my kitchen table with printouts, tracing the story Jake had built about himself, and it was breathtaking, honestly, the scope of it. There were interviews where he described bootstrapping Meridian from a spare bedroom. There was a business magazine profile with the headline, "The Self-Made Man of Modern Agriculture." There was a keynote where he told 1,000 people that the hardest part of building an empire is that no one believes in you at the start. No one believed in him. I believed in him. I wrote the check that made the spare bedroom story possible, and then I let him tell it without me in it, because I thought that was what a good partner did. Investors believed the story. The board believed it. And Sloane, I realized, Sloane believed it most of all. She had not fallen for a cheating husband. She had fallen for a founder, a self-made king, exactly the kind of man she had clawed her whole life to stand next to. Her cruel little line at the party came back to me while I sat there. Behind every founder is a woman who finally got out of his way. She thought she was talking about me. She thought I was the woman who had failed to keep up with a great man. She had it exactly backward and did not know it yet. I was not the woman who got out of his way. I was the woman whose way he had been standing in, wearing a crown I let him borrow, signing my name when he thought I was not counting. I was always counting. That was the whole point. That was the one thing my father made sure of. On Monday, I made the move that could not be walked back. Working with Dana, I exercised my rights as the controlling shareholder and called an emergency meeting of the Meridian Board to be held that Thursday in the main glass conference room on the top floor. The same floor. I chose it on purpose. Let them gather in the exact room where the champagne had been. The notice went out under my full legal name, and I could almost hear the sound it made landing in inboxes across that company. The sound of a name people had filed under Jake's wife, suddenly appearing at the top of a legal instrument with 83% of the voting power behind it. At the same time, the withdrawal of the bridge financing was finalized. That mattered more than the meeting, in cold terms. Jake and Sloane had been leveraging the promise of that capital to hold up the valuation and close their big expansion. When I pulled it, the number under them started to fall, and there was nothing either of them could do, Because it had never been their money. It had been mine, guaranteed by my name, extended on my trust. I had not stolen anything from them. I had simply stopped giving. There is a particular kind of power in that, and I had never let myself use it before. Not because I lacked it, because using it meant admitting I had it, and admitting I had it meant the marriage was never the partnership I had pretended. By Monday afternoon, I was done pretending. Dana asked if I was sure. I said I had never been more sure of a number in my life. Then I sat back and waited for the phone to start ringing. It did not take long. The word got out the way words always get out in a company, through the walls, faster than any memo. By Tuesday, everyone at Meridian knew that the woman they had called the bookkeeper was the majority owner, and that she had opened an audit, and that the audit had found something. And my phone, which had been so quiet for 6 years that I sometimes checked whether it was on, came alive. It started with Jake, then Sloan, then Grant, then numbers I did not recognize. Investors, board members, a reporter who somehow already had a whiff of it. Then Carol. The screen just kept lighting up on the kitchen island, buzzing across the granite, Jake's face flashing over and over. Then Sloan, then Jake again. I sat with my coffee and I watched it the way you watch weather. At one point I picked it up, not to answer, just to see, and the little red badge on the phone icon read a number I had to look at twice. 152 missed calls. 30 minutes, more or less, from the moment the audit news reached the top floor. 152. For 6 years, I could not get my husband to call me back from a dinner meeting, and now the whole kingdom was dialing my number like the building was on fire. In a way, it was. I set the phone face down. I was not going to have this conversation over the phone, in fragments, letting them plead and spin and manage me the way they had managed everyone. I had a room booked for Thursday. I had a brown folder. I had my father's note over my heart. Whatever they wanted to say, they could say it in front of the board, with the lights on. And then the doorbell rang. I did not answer the door right away. I want to tell you about the 20 minutes before the doorbell, because they were the most important 20 minutes, and nobody ever films those. While the phone buzzed itself off the counter, I was at the dining table building the file, not a shoebox of grievances. A clean, indexed legal file, the kind you hand to a court and it does your talking for you. Tab 1, the Founding Shareholder Agreement, 83% control provisions highlighted. Tab 2, the Forensic Audit Summary, Priya's letterhead, the 11 forged consents listed by date. Tab 3, the Signature Analysis, my genuine signature beside the forgeries. The differences circled in red so a stranger could see them in a second. Tab 4. The money trail, the transfers, the ring. Everything a prosecutor's office would need to decide whether the word forgery became the word indictment. Dana had already reached out to a contact in the district attorney's economic crimes unit, not to accuse, just to ask the quiet question of what threshold a case like this would need to cross. 11 forged instruments across 3 years, benefiting the forger, was, she was told, well past the threshold. I closed the file and squared its edges against the table. This was my weapon. Not a raised voice, not a scene at a party. Paper. The most patient, most devastating weapon there is, because paper does not get emotional and paper does not forget, and paper cannot be talked out of what it says. Jake had built his whole self out of a story. I was about to answer him with a fact, and it was right then, as I set the file down and reached for my water, that the doorbell rang, long and hard, twice. I looked through the window before I opened it, out of habit, and there he was on my porch, my husband, looking like a photograph of himself left out in the rain. Jake had never once in 6 years stood at this door as anything but the man of the house. Now he stood there small and gray, his tie gone, his coat wrong, jabbing the bell again like it owed him money, and behind him, one step down, in her good coat, stood Carol. Of course he had brought his mother. Of course. I opened the door, but I did not open the storm door between us, so we stood there with a pane of glass and a lock, and 6 years of my silence in the way. Jake started before I could say anything. Tina, thank God, we have to talk. This is all a huge misunderstanding. You have to call off the audit. The words tumbled out of him fast and slick. The salesman voice, the one that used to close loan officers, deployed now on his own wife through a storm door. Behind him, Carol had her hands clasped like she was at church. I did not say anything, which is a thing I have learned to do, and the silence did to Jake what it always does to men like Jake. It made him louder. He said we were a team. Tina, you and me, we built this together. And I almost laughed at the word built, because it was so close to the truth, and so far from what he meant by it. I let him talk. I let him spend all his slick, fast words against the glass, and when he finally ran out of them, breathing hard, I said the only thing I had for him that night. I said, "You're standing outside." "You're standing outside," I said again, quietly, because he had not understood it the first time. This is my family's house. It has always been my family's house, and you are standing outside of it. Something moved across Jake's face then, the moment the charm stopped working, and underneath it I finally saw the man who had signed my name 11 times. Not sorrow. Calculation, curdling into something ugly when it found no purchase. He put his hand flat on the glass. He said, "You can't do this to me, Tina. Do you know what you're doing to me?" And there it was. The whole marriage in one sentence. What I was doing to him. Never once what he had done. Carol pushed forward then. She said, "Please, please don't destroy my son. He's a good boy. He made a mistake." And for one breath I looked at her, this frightened old woman who had spent 6 years chipping away at me, and I saw exactly what she was afraid of. Being alone. A future with no powerful son to orbit. It was the near human thing, the flicker of a real fear. And I felt it. I did. But I have learned that feeling for someone is not the same as owing them your life. I said, "Carol, your son forged my signature to steal from a company I own. That is not a mistake. A mistake is a wrong turn." This was a road he paved. I stepped back into my warm, bright house, my father's house, my house, and I put my hand on the door. I told them the board would hear everything on Thursday, and that they were welcome to attend, since they were both so fond of an audience. Then I closed the door, and I locked it, and I turned off the porch light. Thursday came the way a harvest comes, slow all season and then all at once. I wore gray. I drove myself downtown, 25 minutes, the brown folder on the passenger seat where the roses had been on Valentine's Day. I took the elevator to the top floor, and the doors opened not on champagne this time, but on a long glass conference table and a room full of people who had cheered 8 days earlier and now could not quite meet my eyes. Same room. Same fairy light hooks still screwed into the ceiling, though someone had taken the lights down. Jake was there, at the far end, flanked by a lawyer. Sloane sat 2 seats away from him, no longer touching his arm, the diamond conspicuously turned inward on her hand. Grant was there, small and sweating, with his own separate lawyer, which told the whole room everything before a word was spoken. The board members lined the sides. Dana sat at my right, and I walked the length of that table, past all of them, and I sat down in the chair at the head. The chairman's chair, Jake's chair. I sat in it like it had been fitted for me, because it had. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Sloane, because Sloane cannot help herself, gave a little disbelieving laugh and said, to the room, more than to me, "So the bookkeeper wants a seat at the table now." A few days earlier, that would have found the soft place. Now it just hung there, sounding exactly as small as it was. I set the brown folder on the table in front of me and folded my hands on top of it. I did not laugh. I did not fire back. I looked down the length of the table at all of them, the cheering crowd gone quiet, and I said in the calmest voice I owned, "I don't want a seat at the table. I own the table. Now let's begin." I opened the folder. I did not stand. I did not pace. I did not perform. I have watched Jake perform for 6 years, and I know that the performance is what people remember when the substance is thin. My substance was not thin. So I simply laid it out, tab by tab, and let the paper be louder than I would ever be. I passed copies down both sides of the table. The founding shareholder agreement first, 83% in the Sullivan Family Trust, voting control, the authority under which this very meeting had been called. I watched them read it. I watched the exact second each board member understood that the woman they had ignored for 6 years had been able to end any of them at any time, and had simply chosen not to. Then the audit summary. Then the 11 consents. Then the signature analysis. My true signature laid beside the forgeries. The differences circled in red. I said quietly, "These are 11 board consents authorizing the movement of equity and capital. Each one bears my signature. I did not sign any of them." The room went so still I could hear the building's air handlers. Down the table, Grant made a small sound, and his lawyer put a hand on his arm. But it was too late, because Grant had already started shaking his head and saying, I told him this would come back, over and over, until his lawyer got him quiet. It did not matter. He had confessed with his whole body